Joe, I am going to kind of, just for the sake of time, because I have all my research notes on you, I'm going to just do what David
Toss
Letterman
them,
does.
toss them
But,
out the
but
window. Go ahead.
you know, I'm going to pick them up. But again, welcome to the Museum of Graffiti. I really, really want to thank you for taking out the time to talk with us and share such an important part of your story and the story of the Bronx, the story of hip hop, the story of America. You cover a lot of ground in those things that I've just mentioned. And so I want to start this off, and let me adjust and set my camera up so that you see what I see. And there's that cool graphic of you.
Yes, that graphics was done by Steve Crawley out in London. It's famously known as the hip hop head, with all
And
the hip hop pioneers in my
no,
afro.
yeah, it's wonderful because, I would think at your age, appropriately, you are being celebrated along with many of your friends like Henry Chalfant, Marty Cooper, and Jamal, and Ernie, and others. But really, your story starts here, right, in the Bronx.
Wow.
And this photograph, every time I look at it, moves me. It speaks to me. Uh, it's a lot of things to me. But what is this photograph to you?
Um, it represents the Bronx, the neighborhood that I grew up in, and depending on how you look at it, this was our playground growing up.
Yeah.
Um, I've
And
I've said I've said it time and time again. Um, you can't miss anything you didn't have. So if I didn't grow up in a house with a white picket fence and a backyard, I didn't miss it. This was my backyard. So this was our playground. And, it was just, it was I mean, listen, it was a hard time. I'm not going to lie. This picture was taken during the late 70s, when the politicians came to the Bronx looking for votes.
and just for some context, what we're looking at, folks, is a row of buildings, and you could notice that in the foreground there's this kind of mountain of rubble, and behind it there are three abandoned buildings. The windows are knocked out, and there's this huge three-floor Puerto Rican flag, and the irony is I don't know if that's a school bus below it, but it looks like a
It
school
is a
bus.
school bus, yes.
Yeah. And so, given that this was the background, it's what people should know, and what's very interesting about your life and your upbringing was that what really started to kind of shape you was your grandmother. And she was an important activist in the community. And tell us about Evelina
You
Lopez.
you promised you weren't going to make me cry, okay? So, um, my grandmother, affectionately known as the Hell Lady of the Bronx, Evelina Antonetti, was just a woman who migrated from Puerto Rico and just started dealing with basic human necessities. She is credited with starting bilingual education in public schools, because when you had that big influx of Puerto Ricans during the 40s and 50s that were thrust into the New York school systems, none of the teachers spoke Spanish. So
Nice.
these kids were, put into these special classes, 600 schools and this, that, and the other. And my grandmother was like, wait a minute, this has got to stop,
And so, given that she was a fierce social activist, I guess it would come as no surprise as well that your mother too was a social activist, right? And so here we see her famously protesting in the Bronx about hotels, right? And again, I think just to give this context, right, about your mom and your grandmother of Puerto Rican descent, uh, they had a really rough life coming into growing up in, pre-civil rights and during the civil rights.
I, it, I don't know if I want to call it a rough life. It was an enlightening life. It was a tough time for the nation as a whole, as it is today. But these were pioneering women that didn't sit to the side and just let the world go by them. My grandmother took to the streets. She took to the streets, and this was before the internet, before any of that. You had a Rolodex of phone numbers, and she would call and make phone calls. And when she died in 84, actually, she died in 1984 campaigning for the presidential election that year. My mother took over the position of executive director of United Bronx Parents. And my mother is credited with starting the first drug rehab for women with children. So, they were strong women who today have two street corners named after them, probably the only street corners in the entire country, mother and daughter, named after them. And my mother has a building named after her, and my grandmother has a couple schools named after her.
Wow, what a testament and legacy. And but it's not just the female in your family that have a tremendous impact on society. You yourself early on decide you wanted to pick up a camera, and this was really interesting. And I love this picture of you, wide-eyed and confident. And let's start with the camera and why you picked up the camera.
Again, the picture says everything. Chubby little kid, Angela Davis afro. I wasn't an MC or DJ or baseball player or into sports. A camera was put into my hands at a very young age by my stepfather, Michael Caine, and I just gravitated towards photography. And hey, Tito Puente Jr., I just, it was an icebreaker for me. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Because, I had low self-esteem, and the camera was the icebreaker, and I was one of, if not the only kid in my neighborhood with a camera. And my
The
parents,
other kids, if I could just interject for a second, because the other kids, either, had something else in their hands or a spray can. And you also grabbed the spray can early on. And I just want to cover this so people understand that you're not new to the game, you're true to the game.
I'm true to the game. I was all city before all city was started. You know, uh, y- Listen, I grew up in an era and a time where so much was going on, and I don't know anybody my age or older who didn't gravitate towards graffiti at one time or another, and I did. And I was, influenced by Stay High and Taki and all these teenagers, they're a few years older than me. And I started tagging up. But in my case, when I got caught with a fat marker by my grandfather and got my ass whipped, I put the fat marker down and picked up the camera. So that was the end of my graffiti days. But that's what I wrote. And if you can look at it, Cool Cane, just the stick figures and just everything. It was just, it was the thing to do at the time, to get up,
Right.
and get people to see your name and the street that you were coming from, 149th Street, Morris Avenue.
Also, another thing that I found really interesting was that you picked up the camera at such an opportune time because as is noted, your dad was kind of the official biographer of Tito Puente, right? And so before hip hop, you were already around such an important movement, a cultural shift in music, politics. Tell me about this experience in terms of, being having been so close to so many of the iconic and important musicians of the Latin world.
I was just fortunate enough that there was so much going on when I had picked up the camera. My dad was estranged from the family. I didn't get to really know my dad, Joe CONZO Sr., until I was about 13, 14 years old because he had issues with drugs and so did I. And, he came back into my life. But, he on his own rights has been clean and sober over 50 years, and I'm celebrating 30 years this year. Um,
Congratulations.
Thank you. He had developed a relationship with Tito Puente Sr. and became the foremost historian on Latin music and Tito Puente himself. So while all of this was going on, I was going to school with the pillars, the foundation, the bricklayers of hip hop. I'm being reintroduced or getting to know my dad again. So when I wasn't taking pictures of my classmates that I went to school with, I'm hanging out with my dad taking pictures of these Latin giants,
And
these
and here,
legends,
I know here we have Hard Hands
Ray
Barreto,
Barretto
yeah,
and Johnny Pacheco.
Johnny Pacheco, right?
And they
I'm,
were all known, I'd call them Tio. I mean, that's an affectionate term to, that's how close my dad was to these musicians. And they allowed me to shoot them like I was just part of the family. And, that's a picture of Hector Lavoe. And so, I'm documenting all of this stuff, not knowing that 30, 40, 50 years, 30 years later, I'd be traveling the world, eh, showing my work.
and
That's
and here we have a picture of La Reina, Celia Cruz and her jubilant self. That
yes.
must have been extraordinary to document her and see her live as a young man.
Of course. I mean, Celia to me was known as Titi, and Tito Puente Jr. can attest to that too. She just treated everybody with such love and more that you had these legends who walked around and never denied an autograph or anything to anybody, like unlike today where I don't want to mention any names like Jennifer Lopez, who you have to go through 5 layers of an entourage just to get an autograph. But
Sure.
here you had, Celia and Tito and Ray and
And here you have her with Izzy Sanabria, and this
Izzy
is
Sanabria. Yeah.
which is fabulous. And he's another important Puerto Rican that we all celebrate and appreciate in the culture.
Phenomenal artist also.
Yeah,
Phenomenal artist, graphic artist.
yeah. I curated a show for him, and when I had the gallery with High Arts in East Harlem, and it was an incredible experience to hear him tell these stories of this period of shift, of cultural shift, of musical shift, and community, right? And this picture with this stage in the center of a street with thousands of people. I see KTU there. Was what kind of event was this?
So this was your normal block parties that we used to have in the Bronx, and this is the Third Avenue hub. I was actually up in the Wiz record store shooting down, and that's actually a picture of the group called the Mean Machine, who were credited in doing one of the first bilingual hip hop songs, Disco Dreams. And that's Third Avenue, and you could see it was a free event, probably sponsored by KTU at the time, and it's just one of those typical summer block party jams that used to happen so often.
Right. And so speaking of jams, because in the Bronx, um, one of the things that I remember so vividly about the Bronx was that it was a musical uh, borough from street to street. There was always music blaring from whatever window, car, or even lot. But also, there was always the sound of sirens. Something was going on in the Bronx. It was burning, right?
Yes. Yes.
And so tell me about this, because you start documenting that too, not just these people, but these events.
Well, it was, I just started documenting my surroundings, and, I'm not gonna lie, there was fires going on each and every day, 300, for a few years growing up. And, it got to the point where there was so many fires in our building on Caldwell Avenue that, my mother used to offer them coffee through the fire escape because of the fires would go on so much. And it's just amazing how I documented so many of these fires, and I ended up working for the fire department for 27 years.
And so the remains of that. So as a young kid, where does a young kid like you find hope in a situation that feels so hopeless?
Again, Carlos, I mean, hopeless, it wasn't one of those things where, okay, we had our parents. My mother was a single mother raising 5 kids, had a strong grandmother, grandfather, aunts and uncles. You had that family unity. So again, there was a lot of urban decay going on, a lot of despair, but there was a stronger family unity going on at the time. So if there wasn't enough food for my mother to feed us that night, our next door neighbor would feed us. So there wasn't that much hopelessness or despair as a child growing up, because I didn't know what hopelessness or despair was, because my mother made sure we had clothes on our backs, we were fed, and we were looked after. So,
But even so, as a documenter, I mean, if I look at the photographs, even this particular composition from a distance as a witness, the solitude of this guy here in front of Lincoln Hospital, uh, I I really felt that. I mean, obviously you have a very empathetic eye, or just you understand humanity in a way.
I mean, I can say, actually with this picture, I had just graduated from high school, and one of my first jobs out of high school was working in the emergency room at Lincoln Hospital, and I lived across the street. We lived across the street from Lincoln Hospital. So there was a lot of empathy going on in my family growing up, and, towards other humans, because my upbringing, we didn't care what color you were or where you were from. You were a human being, and if you needed a plate of food or education or clothes on the back, that's how we were brought up. You know what I mean? So yeah, but
So so there was just to kind of take off of that, right? Um, this picture, right, that I found of yours of Paul Newman and this woman putting her hand out. What happened at that moment? Because this you're on set of Fort Apache, the Bronx, a movie that was really controversial at the time, and its
so
portrayal. Yeah, go ahead.
so real quickly, Hollywood came knocking on the door of my grandmother, not knowing who she was, and they asked her if they could rent or use her facilities, her daycare center, her after school facilities, and all these facilities during the filming of Fort Apache the Bronx, so Paul Newman could lay his liberal head down in between shooting. And my grandmother was like, sure, we love Paul Newman. He's a liberal, for the people. And by the way, can you send me a script so I can read the script? And, can you, we're going to hire 200 extras people in the community and give them jobs. And my grandmother was like, yes, she got the script. She read the script. If the script portrayed nothing, portrayed everybody in the Bronx as a drug addict, junkie, murderer, prostitute, you name it under the sun. I mean, even the nurse in the movie, Rachel Tacone, was a drug addict nurse stealing medication in the hospital. And my grandmother was like, no fucking way. So she made some phone calls to all her ex-Young Lords and Black Panther people, Richie Perez and all that, and they put together a group called CAFA, Committee Against Fort Apache. And we demonstrated against the movie everywhere they filmed at. And that famous picture of Paul Newman is actually the first picture I ever had published. The New York Post published it, gave me $25. And I had wandered onto the set to take pictures, and Paul Newman locked eyes with me, and that cast member tried to get in front of us, and my camera was too quick, and I got a shot of Paul Newman.
That's interesting. So you know what's another thing, a little, just so you know, because I remember I was in art and design in high school, and one of my friends, she played the pregnant girl in the movie.
The one that she didn't know that she was pregnant all those months, hiding her pregnancy?
Yeah. So the irony of this movie, right? It portrayed us as a certain way. And look, I get it. The Bronx was burning. It was crazy. But also, this picture, when I saw this picture today and I said, oh my God, this was my first summer job, cleaning lots of the burned out buildings that I used to play in.
And that is so true. That was my first job too. My grandmother, again, with her organization, United Bronx Parents, was a big sponsor of summer youth jobs. And, she made sure, hundreds of kids in the Bronx got, these summer jobs. And, that was part of, working for a living. And that's, I never looked back. I've always worked, and thank God for those summer youth jobs and winter jobs, because they had the winter jobs too. But you don't have that today, and that's why we have such disruption with our youth today, because they have nowhere to go after school or do anything or jobs during the summer, and which is such a shame.
And this picture that we're looking at,
Eric Orr.
Yeah, the United Bronx Parents, with, of course, your grandma being the founder, Evelina Antonetti. This, again, the self-empowerment, right? Being in the thick of it. How exciting is that, man?
I'm so proud of my family legacy, or the DNA that's in my blood now, because it is still evident today. Bilingual education, summer lunch program, all these things, rehabs for women with children, they're still relevant today. And to say that my family had a big role in starting a lot of these things, I'm so proud of, and it resonated in me, where in my role as an EMT and paramedic with the fire department, I got involved into the union aspect of my job, where, for the last 15 years of my 27-year career with the fire department, I was involved with the unions. And my last position was the vice president of the fire department's union of EMTs and paramedics. And, it's just, if not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. You know what I mean?
And one of the things that I was really moved by this particular picture was the handing out of government cheese.
Government cheese, as David Gonzalez would say it. Yes.
El queso.
El
I guess
queso.
that's why we used to say, "Yo, we got to go get that cheese. We got to go get that cheddar."
Listen, that cheese, grilled cheese sandwiches were 2 or 3 times a week, macaroni and cheese and this, that, and the other, and it was just a surplus of cheese that the government, let loose. And you know, it was it, it was just crazy.
So now that we've painted a little bit of this kind of background, the social background, something starts happening, which is really interesting, right?
Go ahead.
It was super interesting for me because my household was so musical. My mom was a lover of music and Spanish ballads from Puerto Rico, salsa, Cuban music, doo-wop especially, and then Motown, and then all of us funk. Funk she wasn't that into, but then something else happened from funk, which started this something going on in the Bronx, right? And this, we're going to dig into this book, The Born in the Bronx, which is having a second. You got a prop? Perfect. Um, so it, there's a reissue coming up, so I want to let people know that. And it's a fantastic book, right? Of your photographs and essays by some of the pioneers
As
uh, and, and,
yourself.
and myself, but also, and thank you, Johann Kugelberg out there for
Yes.
making this
Yes.
happen. So he was the editor of the book, somebody with a deep passion for these narratives and not just the narrative, the ephemera as well. So Born in the Bronx opens up, really as it has been said, you took hip hop's baby pictures. And here we have Kool Herc at 20 something years old, probably.
Probably, we have Cool Herc, DJ Tony Tone at the T Connection, and Cool Herc was this mythical person during the streets at that time that everybody spoke about. I like to tell the story that, I grew up in the disco era and was kidnapped into this hip hop thing that was going
Yes,
on, or
yes,
this
yes.
rap thing that was going on, because we didn't call it hip hop until later on. And Tony Tone, who's standing next to Cool Herc, the shorter one, I actually went to high school with. And it was Tony and Easy AD who invited me up to the T Connection up here up in the North Bronx to take pictures of them putting this group together called the Cold Crush Brothers.
Right.
And, to meet Cool Herc for the first time, because he was such an urban myth, legend, giant, was like, wow, 6'2", Jamaican guy, that everybody spoke about. And this is one of the earliest pictures of him that I have in my archives. And by the way, he hates this picture. He really does hate this picture because his tongue is sticking out. But
Uh,
it's such an iconic picture. He's got, a fedora hat on, a Lee jean jacket with a shirling jacket under it. And, it's got that pose, that
yeah.
b-boy pose.
Yeah, and I want people who are watching this and listening to us just to kind of take note as how the fashion and hip hop progresses through this conversation, right? Here we have again, part of what was happening with the culture was dance. Dance was important. There, there were b-boys and uh, the writers, of course, and people should know this too that
Shout out to Ricky Flores. That belongs to Ricky Flores.
oh, that is a
That
Ricky
picture.
Flores picture?
Yeah.
Okay. So there is this whole thing that's starting to bubble, right? Because some of the MCs are writers too, right? And
Oh, of
so,
course.
right? And Kool
Yeah.
Herc said he wrote graffiti a little bit as well.
You ask any MC such as Kaz and all these phenomenal goats, these, giants, they started out as b-boys and even graffiti writers. I mean, Kaz has you could probably find probably 2 or 3 dozen flyers that Kaz actually did himself
Yeah.
promoting parties. You know what I
Let's
mean?
let's 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 go in that direction because this is a good segue into what's coming up about these parties. Now, I remember that they were happening both in schoolyards, in community centers, and even in churches.
So,
Uh,
so we didn't have, being the rebel teenagers that we were back then, we didn't have access to grown folks clubs. Maybe, every once in a while. So it was the school gymnasiums, the PALs, the boys club, the whole Avenue Boys Club, all these community centers that allowed us to do these jams, and it wasn't until later on that, as we got older, that the clubs started letting us, young teenagers in. But this picture is actually at the Dixie Club, and it was during the filming of Wild Styles. And I'll let you in on something that I never knew up until I was in Berlin with Days the last year, and those are his pieces in the background that he did for the movie Wild Styles. I never knew that.
really?
Never
Uh,
knew that.
I
Yeah,
I would never be able to connect the dots on that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So shout out to Days.
Yeah, nice little factoid. And
Yeah.
again, one of the things, if I can go back, again, one of the things I'll point out is the fashion, right? You start seeing a shift in how people look and the swagger of the rappers, right? And they're picking up where the '70s soul singers and funk singers were at.
Well, to quote Johan, it was about next Friday, next Saturday. It was about the next jam. It wasn't about the bling and the gold or record deals at the time. It was about fashion. It was about nameplates and name belts
Yeah, pause
and
there for a second, Joe. Pause. Who is this on stage
that's
reaching
the
out?
that is the almighty KG, and we're in Harlem World. So you
But
gotta
let's just for a second. I'm sorry. I just want to highlight this, and it's kind of a silly thing,
go ahead.
but you see his belt buckle. It says Pisces, right?
Yeah,
And so the thing was with MCs back then, the shout out, "What's your sign?"
all the time. What's your sign? What's your sign? What neighborhood you were from?
Right? This call and response.
Call and response back and forth. MC, master of ceremonies. You're controlling the crowd. But even more so, this is a time before the internet, before we had records on or anything like that. And the Cold Crush Brothers, and this is KG, who is a member of the Cold Crush Brothers, used to have me make 8 by 10 photos in my darkroom at home or posters, and we used to throw them out to the crowd. So that's how far ahead they were, throwing out ephemera to the crowds. You know what I mean? And here you have KG throwing out probably one of my photos out to the crowds. And, Cold Crush Brothers were, you have Smoke. They were the first group to use a smoke machine on stage. And it was
Yes.
just, they were just so far ahead of their time.
So one of the things I want to let this lead us into, as before we get to the Kokosh brothers, is how you get to the jam, right? How the word spreads about the jam. And the flyer game was so funny and crazy back then. Obviously, you see young illustrators, young wannabe illustrators, and you see the influence of graffiti in the letter forms. But one of the things in this conversation, I'll focus on two people, obviously, that are super important, right? Buddy Esquire, may he rest in peace,
King of Flyers.
who had such a tremendous impact in his graphic design. And so tell me a little bit about what you knew about Buddy and his flyers.
I'll tell you a true story. So Buddy Esquire was, the flyer king. And no disrespect to Phase 2 or any of those other guys that did flyers, but Buddy used to actually take some of my photographs, my 8x10 photos, and cut and paste and put them and use them in his flyers.
Here's a good example of that.
No other group was doing that. No other group was doing that. You know, and you know, so one thing, and I had never met Buddy. Buddy and I didn't meet until the early 2000s. True story. True story. And one thing I used to tell AD, who was the go-between, the conduit with Buddy Esquire for the Flyers and Cavs, was I used to tell AD was tell Buddy to give me photo credit. So on some of the flyers you would see photo by Jay Kane, you know what I mean? But Buddy, was just that Art Deco, graphic artist that was just so amazing using, cut and paste lettering and just it was just amazing. And it's a shame that he died at such a young age. But a very humble, lovable guy that is sorely missed, sorely missed.
Yeah, I was always fascinated with these flyers when I came across them, and it's a shame that I didn't keep any. But I'm so glad that Johan managed to collect a bunch of them, and I believe they're at the Cornell archive,
Yes,
right?
yes. Johan, if you can jump in there if you can or anything. I mean, Cornell must have like 2,000, 3,000 flyers from back then. I mean, everybody was doing flyers at the time, but Buddy and even his brother Eddie Ed and FaZe and
So phase two, it's interesting because phase two had a different take on the flyer, his
right.
design, his graphic design. He really was trying to separate himself from Buddy in that, and again, in artistic terms, he was, this kind of design really, I find, pulls from early 1900s Russian graphic design and photography, and boy, did we covet his flyers. I mean, they were so beautiful and balanced and
Yes.
designed. I mean, he was such a pioneer as well with Buddy in terms of really developing hip hop media, and that clearly influenced me and lots of other people. But more importantly, it helped shape this musical culture, this genre. Not just the music, because later on you would see that there would be like, oh yeah, this will be featuring this b-boy crew or that b-boy crew as well.
True, true, true. And it's a lost art that that is just I'm just so glad that it's been preserved and it's still being preserved. And you got to understand something. You know, you look at some of my images. You have 600, 700 people, packed up into a gymnasium or anything like that. You know, that's because of the flyers. We had to go bribe the high school, custodian or whatever to break into the mimeograph room because we didn't have Xerox machines back then or anything. So we had to make a stencil, or Buddy had to make a stencil and get it mimeographed and get thousands of flyers printed up, and then we would just hand them out for the following week. And you used to go around to different high schools, and that's how you'd get your crowd to come to the next jam. I mean,
Hmm.
there was no radio play. There was no newspaper advertisement. We weren't definitely getting any shout outs on radios to come see the Cold Crush Brothers perform, like you can do today. But,
Who is in this photograph, Joe? Who's this performing?
that is JDL, the hut maker, the original hype man. You have what's his face from Public Enemy with the
Flavor Flav.
clock, Flavor Flav, who credits JDL's being the original hype man of hip hop. And
Yeah.
JDL, his tag team partner was Grandmaster Caz, and before they were Cold Crush Brothers, they were called the Notorious Two, and JDL was just the biggest hype man there is.
He was very flashy. And again, I point out to the fashion, the changing fashion of time. I also want to talk to you about your relationship with the Cold Crush Brothers, because you focused a lot on them, obviously because they were your friends. But also there was always the Fantastic Romantic Five, the Treacherous Three. There were all these other wonderful groups at the same time that were kind of competing with them.
You got to understand something, Carlos. At that time, I was just a young 16, 17-year-old photographer documenting my surroundings. And when I had the opportunity through these guys who I went to school with to come take pictures of this new thing that was happening, because it wasn't called hip hop back then.
No.
This new genre of music. The first jam I ever went to was up at the T Connection up here on Gun Hill and White Plains Road.
By the
And
way, did you know, let me just interject, that there was a train layup right there above T Connection where we used to paint. So we used to hear some of the vibration.
oh
And they were
shit,
having, yeah, yeah,
oh
yeah.
shit.
A
So
little graffiti hip hop thing.
there you go. So I had no idea that I was documenting a genre of music that would just surpass rock and roll 40 years later, 50 years later, surpass jazz, surpass every genre of music, and most of my images are performance-based pictures because I was hanging out with the Cold Crush Brothers. But through the Cold Crush Brothers, I got to photograph other, groups at the time, you know, um, and I was just fortunate enough not knowing that my pictures would become so sought after, and you know I'd be traveling the world showing my work. I mean, I'm a 57-year-old man who still can't believe that I grew up in the South Bronx, and I've been to Bulgaria. Hip hop is alive and kicking in Bulgaria. I've been to Japan. I've been to Korea. I've been to London. I've been to Germany. I've been all over the world because I took pictures and not
And so give
knowing.
me an idea of how foreign people with foreign customs, culture, and music respond to all of this.
Well, let me tell you something. They love and respect and know more about the culture than probably you and I do. And that's always fascinated me when I've traveled abroad to these different countries where, um, I've always asked, the question to me, they've always asked me, how was it growing up in the Bronx? And I'm like, I turned out okay, you know, and my question to them was, how do you know so much about this culture of hip hop? And they were like, because we weren't a part of it. They want to know everything. So you have these kids from London and Germany and Japan and Korea that know so much about the culture that just blows my mind. And I guess in any genre of music, it's so true that in the American culture we discard everything that's old. We don't claim, we only claim what's new. And it's a shame that, these guys, the hip hop artists, Kaz and Mo D and, LL and all these guys, and then throw in John Coltrane, Nina Simone, and all these jazz artists, they're more famous overseas and more respected than they are here in their own country. And it's a shame. It's a shame.
But lucky for us that, the book and the photographs exist and that you are reissuing the book. And here we got J-Lo from the block representing, because she's from the Bronx, and she she has the book in hand, and we hope more people um, actually get this next edition of your book. But more importantly, shifting gears, it's not just about the baby pictures of hip hop. You have taken pictures of some of my favorite MCs of all time, if not all of them, so to speak. Here we have the God MC Rakim on the left, of
Rakim.
course, the storyteller Slick Rick on the right. Um, Tell me about witnessing this tremendous transformation, this success, not just success in terms of the music business, but the success of young men in the hood, and the, the 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 shift in consciousness, right? And in the early years.
It's just, I'm still amazed today how this thing that we used to do on every Friday, Saturday nights at South Bronx High School in our gymnasium has grown globally, all over the world. And, you know, I've gotten to travel all over the world because of this thing that we call hip hop, and to gain the respect out of a lot of these artists who I've have photographed over the years. And like Jay-Z, I've never met him before, but when I did meet him for the first time that day at the Brooklyn Hip Hop Festival, he knew who I was based on my photographs that he had seen or has seen as a young kid, growing up loving, the culture. And to have the respect and admiration of these great artists today,
Yeah,
Swiss Beats, is just amazing.
yeah, I think that's the one thing that I admire. This particular picture of Swiss really, really moved me. And he was from my neighborhood in the Bronx. And the tremendous success, if again, I was really there at the just kind of one of the most challenging places in the Bronx. And that somebody like him would rise up from that, right? And have an impact in music and arts and in culture in general. This picture is that, as they call black excellence. You see that in his eyes. And again, there's something wonderful about what you captured in him and some of these other folks.
Again, it's just I've always, as a photographer, respected the subject that I'm shooting. And if you can't respect the subject that you're shooting, you shouldn't be in photography. And, that's what I've always shown, is respect to the artists. And that's why I've been allowed to have access to a lot of events and
Yeah, and
shoot the way I want to shoot the way
right.
I've been taught to shoot, because the way they treat photographers today is they put them in a cattle pen, they let you out for 2 songs, and they hustle you back into a cattle pen, which I don't shoot that way. If I can't have what I call a "don't fuck with Joe Conzo" pass, I'm not shooting your event. And, I've been fortunate enough to be the house photographer at Lehman College and shoot the Four Tops and all these other phenomenal groups that I grew up listening to. And, it's about respecting the art, for what it comes down to.
Joe, I want to shift gears to a little bit more serious and somber discussion.
Oh, shit.
Um, we share something in common, and a lot in common actually, as we both witness and testify about our experience here in New York and all things New York. One of the biggest things that was transformational for me in my lifetime and your lifetime. Um, oh, you know what? Before I get to that, actually.
Ta-da!
Before I get to that, actually, forgive me.
Yes, the mighty OJs.
This book that you were part of with Kevin Fitzpatrick is part of a series, 111 Places in. someplace in the world. They chose you for the Bronx. And this was really exciting and really interesting. You came to the studio and shot me at the studio and included me in this book. And you love the Bronx. You
Hey,
absolutely love the Bronx.
listen, born in the Bronx, I got it tattooed on my arm. The Bronx just resonates through my body, my family, and culture. So much has come out of the Bronx. Is just where do I begin? Hip
Well,
hop,
yeah, hip hop, but let's begin with even something more like not more important, but more just monumental, right?
excess. Well,
Right?
yeah. I mean, listen, in doing
The,
this book, 111 Places in the Bronx You Must Not Miss, I thought I knew everything about the Bronx there was to know.
yeah,
Poof,
same here.
poof.
I did not know that the Lincoln Memorial was sculpted in the Bronx.
Right there on Willis Avenue and 137th Street.
I lived right there, my
I
man.
mean, who knew? You
Who
know,
knew?
who knew? I
Wait,
mean,
also, this is a new one for me. Who knew that the Capitol Dome, which is not cement or marble, it was casted, was done in the Bronx?
who knew? Who knew? I mean, I was so honored when Kevin Fitzpatrick, the author, or who did all the research, said, told the editors, told the company, you can't do this book without Joe. Joe is the Bronx. He is the Bronx photographer. So, it was a year-long passion that I had some input in. And, Kevin and I worked together. We drove to all these spots, taking pictures. And it was a learning experience for me on a borough that I love so much. And to have Bio from the Tats crew do the cover of the book, was a blessing also. But,
That's
you
official.
know, yeah. And um, it's just amazing how much the Bronx has contributed to this country. Period. End of story. Period. End of story. You know what I mean? I mean,
I agree. I
from the
agree. And
Revolutionary War to the Lincoln Memorial to, I mean, just so
yeah,
much.
again, you can just even look at home, to the whole civil rights struggle, right, for
Yes.
Puerto Ricans. If it wasn't, that period along with the African American community, and, the organizations and even the Young Lords Party, boy, what kind of city would we have lived in?
True
Uh,
that.
and that said, this is where this our city, which we love, and this goes to my point about the love of New York and the tragedy and triumph of the city. And again, you are an EMT worker, right?
No,
And
I'm not called it. It's not called an. I'm an EM. Okay, yeah,
please
you
tell
can
me,
say.
please, no, please correct me.
All right, so you have two titles. You have an EMT and you have a paramedic. And EMT
Right.
stands for an emergency medical technician. Then you have what's called a paramedic.
And
We are referred to as ambulance drivers and this, that, and the other, which is so wrong, but hey, it is what it is. But yes, I spent 27 years with the New York City Fire Department,
but
emergency medical.
which side of that do you fall in? Are you a paramedic or
EMT, emergency
you're
medical technician.
EMT? Okay,
Yes.
so you're giving me the middle finger right now, like
Yeah.
get it right.
Yes.
So let's talk about that because you 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 had challenges in your life which you've openly discussed about, substance abuse and uh,
Homelessness and
homelessness, right?
yeah.
And something shifts that you want to be of service.
Again, it was something that was in my blood, instilled in my blood with my family, my mother, my grandmother, my father. my stepfather. It was about activism and, civic duties.
Right.
And I had gotten clean. I had taken the test to become an emergency medical technician. And in my first year of sobriety, I got hired by the city to work for the city. And it was just phenomenal. I mean, there's no bigger joy in this world than saving a life or delivering a baby. Hands down. I can't listen.
True indeed. And I want to talk to you about your experience of dealing with that, with saving lives during 9/11, which for both of us was a rather trauma, if not the world, a rather traumatizing experience. And I'm curious because a couple things. Uh, you were engaged. Well, I'll let you tell me.
Well, I mean, listen, to be an EMT or paramedic, you have to be a little bit off-centered. I mean, it's a strenuous job. You see horrible things besides beautiful things. But one of the things we're adrenaline junkies. Okay? We want to be at the shooting, the car accident, the fire. We want the big jobs, because that's what we're trained for. I don't mind taking grandma to the hospital because she slipped and fell. I really don't. I do mind taking, Wang Bobo to the hospital because he has something dripping between his legs for 3 days and has a pain when he goes to the bathroom. You know, this is what we train for, and, when 9/11 happened, it was, you know, a plane into a building. Then it was a second plane into a building. And then it was the word terrorism. And it was almost like I don't want to go down there because I haven't been trained in terrorism. But the other part of me was like, you have to go down there because this is thousands of people are going to be hurt or killed and you have to be there. And one of the biggest memories I have of that day was driving down the West Side Highway and seeing thousands and thousands and thousands of people running up the highway away from the buildings. And the only people you saw going towards the buildings were the EMTs, the paramedics, the firefighters, the cops, and people trying to help. And, got there, did what we had to do, and never expected to have a building fall on me. And I literally had Tower 2 encase me in a tomb, and I had to dig myself out. And, I did almost 2 years of therapy because I had what's called survivor's guilt. Why was I still alive and thousands of other people dead? And, it's something that it's lived with me. We're going to go on the 20th anniversary this year, and to share with the audience, who probably already knows, I was a big advocate because we knew that 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 area was going to be toxic. We knew that air that we were going to be breathing for those months and months and months during the recovery efforts after was going to be toxic. So I became the poster child for the fire department in fighting for the World Trade Center Health Registry Program, which is now known as the Drazoga Bill, and it protects people who have come down with certain illnesses that lived or participated in the 9/11 cleanup or rescue. And that's a poster of me that was circulated all over the city, and I traveled from West Coast, East Coast, advocating for benefits or just a basic registry program. And in 2018, when I retired from the fire department, I was diagnosed with liver and pancreatic cancer. So kudos for me for working so hard to get all of those benefits passed, because I ended up using those benefits myself. Um, it's just a sad state of affair that we're still in today, that people are still uh, uh, dealing with the effects of 9/11, whether it's physically, medically, or mentally, that, 20 years later, we're still dealing with it. And we still have to fight for benefits, or at least basic human coverage. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I was a city worker at that time, making barely, above minimum wage as an EMT. Granted, good health benefits and all of that, but not too many people would run towards 210-story burning buildings for, $9 an hour. You
No,
know what I
but
mean?
I commend you for that, and all the people who really put their lives on the line for others. And I'll share with you that I lived just 6 blocks away from the World Trade Centers, in front of it, and I saw all this unfold.
So my
And
question to you is, are you part of the registry program?
um, no, I'm not. But
So
I'll tell you this: I take very good care of myself. But the trauma that you speak about, right? The lasting trauma of things like this, but even the lasting trauma of the South Bronx, right? Because that in itself was an act of horrendous proportion that I always say was a crime against humanity. And
true.
I've learned to defend that, and I've learned that statement by looking at Marty Cooper's pictures and even your pictures of what that was like for children. And the bullshit comments I've heard before is, oh, people choose that life and how to take care of their community and so on and so forth. No, that's not. That is a repercussion of political decisions that fall hard on those less fortunate. And again, same thing with the terrorism strike, right? It fell on people who had no inkling and no connection to that kind of response from a foreign agent, so to speak.
Well, I
And
mean, that just goes to show how naive Americans can be. We thought we were untouchable at the time, and we didn't, think that it could happen on our soil, so to speak, on this end. And it was a big eye opener. I mean, the first eye opener was the first time they tried to bomb the World Trade Center in the parking garage, where a handful of people passed away from that, but it didn't bring the towers down. But it just goes to show that, we're not untouchable. We reap what we sow sometimes. And, on that day, we reaped what we sowed. And it's thousands of innocent people died that day because of our government's actions
yeah,
or inactions. And, and we're still paying for it.
yeah. I mean, look, one of the fortunate things, as you mentioned, the untouchableness. You fortunately are touchable, and
Salabatello,
we get to that's a big name right there. We get to celebrate
big
you now,
name.
and hug you and appreciate the work and the contributions you've given to us, right? And you've made our lives that much richer around the world. And the closing shot, which I love, this guy right here. You got to
But
explain this picture, bro. Joe,
those are
you got
just
some explaining to do.
those are just the characters in our neighborhood. That's around the corner. It's crazy how I'm talking to a pioneer like as yourself in the graffiti, and I grew up around the corner from Fashion Moda and never went there. You
No
know what I
way.
mean? Never went there. Never. I'm too busy taking pictures of jams. You and Crash and, Days were hanging, around the corner from me at Fashion Moda and, with Marty and Henry. And I'm on the other side of the Bronx taking pictures. So it's just so how amazing how our paths were so parallel and interconnecting that, we can talk about it today. But that's just a character that used to hang out on 3rd Avenue and 149th Street that I took a picture of,
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. So Joe, what a story. I'm sure we're scratching the surface on you. There's a lot to be said about you and your experiences. And, uh, you know, I started out putting this presentation together knowing that I had to start with a photograph that defined so much about my young experience or our young experience, right? That people at this point are both curious and also fantasizing, right? They're kind of like, oh wow, you're part of this like amazing, like period of time, and sometimes I say to people, and I appreciate your position on this. You're kind of like, look, it is what it is. You kind of like, we didn't know no better, and so on and so forth. I still have some of the bumps and bruises, so I know that, like,
Yeah, it's just the way, it's just who I am today. You know what I
yeah,
mean? Having to go and, you can relate to it because we've gone through so much in our youth growing up in the Bronx. Those trials and tribulations made us into the men that we are in today. And that's how I look at it.
yeah, and
I,
you've remained incredibly humble and giving and encouraging, uh, to your credit.
it's
And
hard.
again, no, of
It
course, because
it
you have
it's
your own struggles, right?
it's hard. It's hard. I mean, it's just like, listen, a joy shared is twice the joy. A sorrow shared is half the sorrow. And I'm just very optimistic. And,
Yeah,
2 days
that's
before Christmas, I got a letter in the mail from the new owners of my building that I have to vacate in 90 days. I'm like, motherfucker, this is Joe Conzo. I've been here for 24 fucking years,
You're kidding me.
and you're telling me I have to vacate my building? Fuck you. There's a pandemic going on. You know what I mean? So it's
So
like,
it sounds to me that this moment,
it's
okay, está llamando los espíritus de tu abuelita y
Of
tu mamá.
course, yeah, of course. And it's like, here we go again.
Yeah,
Landlords were burning the building down because of the black and brown people and this, that, and the other, and collecting the insurances and this, that, and the other. But now you can't burn buildings down like you did in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Now we're going to take your buildings away from you and make them cooperative and throw you guys out, and I'm like, God, you're picking the wrong fight because, you don't know the legacy that I come from. And like, it's going to be a cold day in hell when you kick me out of my place, my home, you know, and it's just, another struggle, another struggle.
yeah. And as the Bronx starts, it's interesting that your book is coming out again in a second edition.
No,
As the
it's not a second edition. It's called an expanded edition. So
there,
we added 32 more pages to it with more pictures, more write-ups. LL Cool J wrote the forward. Thank you, LL, to that. And, it's going to be released through 1X Run, who you've dealt with before. And I'm grateful for that. And Johan and I are excited about it because it's, a hard sought after book. I mean, you can go on eBay and, spend, a couple of $100. I've seen it as high as $800. And, in the next couple of days, week or so, it's going to be available on a very limited edition. And, I hope people, grab it.
Well, we hope to carry it at the museum. It would be an important
definitely.
addition. And I was going to say, kind of in closing, that the book and the photographs and the stories in it are so historically important about this place that we love, the South Bronx. And, what a testament to you and your family, right? For all the work you've done. So
Thank you.
On behalf of the museum and the museum staff, we really, really want to thank you. And I would even say, and again, and on behalf of all those who joined us and those who around the world who love you and celebrate you, we really appreciate you, Joe.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Carlos. Appreciate it. How was your holidays?
Tranquilo.
Good.
I got a surprise from my baby sister. Again, we talked about the Bronx a lot because she went through that. So we were processing all this. So this was really opportune to have this conversation with you because it's a healing conversation.
Yeah. Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah. And, thank you for all that you do, and Kat and your crew and Allison for, I haven't been there yet. I plan on going down there. I plan on going down there soon. And, thanks for being a brother all these years. And just to show, I dug this up. This is one of yours.
Oh, shit. That's old.
And yes, it is old. Johan, remember this?
La Bandera.
La Bandera.
I've got some special banderas, coming up. But Joe, again, thank you for the time. I don't want to take too much of your time, but really, sincerely, we'll catch up on the other side of this.
Be safe. Be safe. Be safe.
As always, cuídate. Bendición.
Take care. Johan.
Hey, Johan, have a good night.